From Trimble Construction, you're listening to the Connected Construction Show, where we connect you to the contractors, owners, designers, engineers, and construction professionals who are finding better ways to work. And now, here's your host, Matt Sprague.
All right, so we are back. One more of the three-part series around data availability. What that means from the perspective of the three phases of an asset lifecycle. We started off in week one talking about operations and maintenance. We moved into our planning and design, and now we're moving into construction. And it does make sense. One kind of feeds onto the other, and in reality, it's a cyclical nature to it all in terms of data and availability helping the next. So the historical data available throughout operations and maintenance makes planning and design a heck of a lot better. The quality information and data availability throughout the planning and design process, I'm making the assumption now, makes construction a heck of a lot easier. So we're going to jump right back into this. So I'll open this question up to everybody. So as-built documentation is a snapshot from a point in time. So what practices can be used to make sure that the as-built condition stays up to date with that reliable data? So we want this reliable data at the end of construction, as I mentioned, cyclical, so that we can have better operations and maintenance. So how do we get there throughout this process?
It's a good question, and it's an interesting one, and I think technology has certainly helped us in that regard, right? Years ago, it was literally the red line markup as-built drawing from the folks in construction, and maybe that got updated in CAD, and that got tossed into some records management system so somebody could look it up in the future, which is still useful and still beneficial, but as construction is completed and a particular asset system is commissioned, there may be some changes. So, LiDAR scanning and making things into a model, an informed model, that you can find information about is hugely beneficial. And I think, again, you mentioned it in your question, Matt, it is a LiDAR too, is a scan's a snapshot in time, right? And we have to make sure that as things change after construction, whether that be 6 months or 6 years, that we make sure that we're maintaining our models and our scans such that when we are again informing operations and maintenance from construction and then on again to planning and design, that we're presenting them accurate information, right? Because I think the biggest pitfall here is that, yes, we have technology that we can get all this great stuff and make it available, but we have to make sure that it's accurate and that it's maintained. So I think technology in that regard, LiDAR scanning is a huge benefit, certainly applicable to many projects, but not all. There's lots of tools out there, but at the end of the day, it's making sure that we are preserving and maintaining accurate as-built information for when construction was completed and or for whenever any of those little modifications are made after the fact, because that's critically important too.
Yeah, this question really speaks to that important transition from construction commission into operations and maintenance, where the assets are literally handed over from a contractor back to the owner, and that transition is traditionally very difficult. So getting high quality as-built or reality capture data like LiDAR scans is critical. And in addition to that, we need to know all of the right information that helps us ingest that data into our long-term record-keeping systems, right? So geospatially, we're typically talking about a GIS system, but we also have to consider our CMMS or EAM systems, right? These are the systems that the owners, the operators, and the facilities folks will be using to capture those assets as they live on for years and likely decades. So the proper data and information needs to sort of be planned out throughout that. In my opinion, through the planning and design stage, we can start building in the right data, the data properties and attributes that need to be collected, sort of build the places for that data to be captured in the construction phase, and ensure through QA QC that the construction folks are actually capturing the data that was requested, so that it can then be transitioned over as easily or as efficiently as possible into other owner-maintained systems like GIS or an EAM. And, once that happens, that really, we need to understand, manufacturing specs, manuals, operations manuals, anything that's really going to inform the operations and maintenance of those particular assets or facilities once they're handed over. All of that is sort of like this. It starts at the planning and design phase and just cascades down to the end of construction, and it cannot be overlooked. That final contract deliverables out of any project is really critical to us, getting the most out of the assets and facilities that are being handed over to us, so we can actually run them efficiently and, hopefully get the best out of them.
I think one thing I'd like to see in the industry, it's interesting in the construction phase, and this is just a statement of fact for where the industry is we do have all this great technology and things and strides that have been made. But when you look at, I would say 99.9% of the construction contracts that are issued, asset management is evolving, planning, design is evolving, building models are being generated, a lot of wealth of information. And it's always been interesting to me that, to this day, 99.9% of contracts are distilled down to a set of flat digital PDFs, and that is what the contractor is required to deliver. And so it's one of those things that you hand them essentially a stack of papers. You can hand them the model, you can give them all of these other pieces of information, but when push comes to shove, or at the end of the day, what is on the digital PDFs is really all that is owed by a contractor. And I think one of the things that I would like to see on the interface, and I do see it, cropping up in various places, is, like Joe said, contract deliverables, need to include beyond the physical asset. It needs to include some sort of digital asset, and it needs to move beyond taking that digital piece of paper and drawing some other things on it and saying, here's your as-built. I think contractors are becoming more sophisticated. They have the potential, but I also think that the onus is on ownership groups, the people, these entities that are funding the projects, to really ask those questions and require that of the contractors to deliver that.
Yeah, to make that the requirement, right? Be like, at the end, this is what I want. So it's interesting. So I think it was episode 11 of the Connected Construction podcast with Oystein Olvestad. And it was Death to Drawings was the title of the episode, right? And he was part of a project in Norway that built a bridge, zero paper. The entire thing was done with the 3D model, and that's the dream, so to speak. So I hear you there, Zach. I'm sorry.
I'll say where it is. I mean, I've seen it cropped up even a little closer than Norway. Is I know entities such as the Illinois Tollway has come and moved forward that they're launching a pilot program to do what's called models of legal documents, and the deliverable that they're contracted to is a model, and their deliverable at the end of the day is a model, and there are PDFs issued, but they are considered for reference only, which is really a exciting notion. And I think that the industry is moving towards that, and part of that is around again interoperability between software systems and a lot of things, making sure that it can be clearly understood. But re-looking at how contracts are structured and those mechanisms, I think is really going to be key in terms of making data available and persistent through that design to operations standpoint. Is continue that thread of digital technology between entities.
Yeah, I completely agree, and this is great to hear. It really needs to start with the owners, making those requirements, establishing those standards and expectations in the contracting documents that are issued, and the bridging documents that are issued, specifying how data will progress. So if we start with a model first approach in our preliminary planning and engineering phases, that should be model first. That model can be turned over for construction, and it can be further advanced through construction based on clash detection, construction that's going on to adjust and update. It can really be leveraged for automated machine guidance, which is something we're really seeing come about in the industry now to help simplify construction, to help simplify and reduce schedule and cost and certainly risk by having these models not just serve as something to help further the construction, but to actually produce the construction. But it all starts with those specifications being very clearly defined up front, and the output conducive and supportive of that owner's systems and data inputs, so that they are not responsible or carrying the risk of having to transcribe or as Rick noted, there's some red line markups here to Zach's point. Well, we gave you the PDF requirements, feel free to have an intern load those into your system, because that time takes too long. And we've seen that with agencies that even have dedicated CAD specialists to bring that information in. It takes time, information's lost, it's incorrectly entered, and then we have a confidence issue, but it's also not there to help influence other projects that are going on. Agencies just don't work one project at a time. There's a lot of things that overlap that would benefit from having that information. So it needs to be available as it evolves in an accurate and corresponding format specified by the owner.
Yeah, Aaron, I think you're absolutely right, and I think owners are almost we're in our own ways sometimes in that regard, where we are, this is how we've done it for so long, and people unfortunately oftentimes forget that, technology has advanced, and that really needs to inform the requirements that we are putting into our documents for what should our ultimate deliverables be, right? Mm-hmm. Because there are deliverables out there now that can inform much better the operations and maintenance side of that resulting asset or group of assets, right? And we need to leverage those, because it's going to make the O&M side job easier, which in turn is going to make planning and design easier, so on and so forth, right? This is absolutely a circle. They all inform one another, and the advances in technology can really be leveraged to make everybody's job easier and make data more efficiently accessible.
Yeah, and just real quickly, owners, I think, need to think very seriously about hiring staff who can articulate these things, right? If an owner doesn't have staff, at hand who can actually represent the ideas we're trying to get across here, they don't know what they're not getting out of their projects, right? So they're sort of left in a situation where, they're just not helping themselves, right? So I want to just put that out there. I think owners should spend some time thinking about how they're staffing up inside, right? Not just hiring, subject matter experts as contractors or consultants, but what internal staff are they bringing to the table who can actually articulate the right needs for their organization as technology is evolving for these things.
And if I could put on my IT hat here for a little bit, one of the things that just started kind of surfacing in my mind as we're talking about, owners and management of this information and data and usage for, these various purposes that really needs to be included in the contract language is the IT security around managing this data. Right, it's not a piece of paper anymore. The contractor, the designer, the engineer, the agency themselves, a lot are moving, to cloud-based software as a service, platform as a service-based solutions for these records and content management systems. And so there needs to be IT level specifications in place that define what PII is, what sensitive security information is for the project, who has access to those files and information throughout their life cycle, how they're stored, backed up, encrypted, auditability, traceability of access, and the life cycle of those records. That's something else that, it hasn't transitioned, right? Because it was never there before. So that language is kind of left open. And I think that's a big risk point that needs to be addressed when we're talking about revisiting contracting language and working with this information is ultimately how it's housed where it's housed, where it's managed, and who has access to that information, both in the varying stages of its development, to help secure and protect it. Because when we're talking about, water treatment facilities, when we're talking about, aviation and rail and, large capital infrastructure, it's important, it's critical, and we need to protect that infrastructure and the access to those records as well.
So when it comes to the data security side, so Aaron, thank you for bringing this up. I think this is important. We're talking about data availability, but how about data protection? So the question, and Aaron, again, same thing, like from your experiences with your customers, but to Joe, Zach, and Rick, has within your organizations, has the concept of FedRAMP or StateRAMP started to bring up? Or number one, do you know what StateRAMP and FedRAMP is first? And if so, have you started to hear that as a data security requirement in the future?
We have from states like Texas and in California. There are varying agencies that also are starting to lead that charge. So we're starting to see that come out, where we, as a contractor, consultant, need to respond to how we manage their data, where it resides. So it's a lot of transparency. And if we're using a cloud-based, platform like AWS or Microsoft Azure, what type of tenant are we in? Who has access to it? How are we controlling the files? If it's managed and maintained in-house, okay, great. But how are we managing, protecting that information? How do we audit it? And from the consultant side, it's, we have varying responses to that. We have certainly risk and liability insurances that are in place. But it is something we're seeing agencies ask for now, and that we're having to be more deliberate in responding to, beyond just, here's our liability insurance, and in responding to a proposal. It's also something we continue to educate on. So, as Joe noted, you need to have individuals asking for it, and able to articulate the what and the why and the how, to help put that contracting language in place and understand how to QA and check it to make sure that it's actually getting done correctly. So being able to perform independent audits. But it's also up to contractors and consultants to help to educate and inform both of the risk and the mitigating factors that can be put in place to still deliver value in a digital world while protecting against bad actors, right? They're there regardless, but we need to make sure that we're following, FISMA, FedRAMP, StateRAMP, that we're working in, isolated, controlled environments, while still opening that data to the folks that need access to it to make those informed decisions, right? We don't want to just lock it away in the basement again. That's not an answer. But we do need to put the necessary protections in place to secure it and make sure that only those that should have access to it are the ones that are able to.
So Joe and Aaron just brought out something that I feel is really applicable to a lot of us, and it's the concept of staff that really know what's going on in this area and can communicate it effectively across the organization. And Joe said something that's really near and dear to my heart. Right, you need to bring on people that can do this work and communicate it effectively. And I think one of the biggest challenges, at least from my perspective in this area, is it is very difficult to quantitatively provide documentation to people when you're asking for new staff to say, hey, this person is going to cost me X and he's going to save me Y, right? Because a lot of the information, the data availability stuff we're talking about, it doesn't innately save you money, right? There's no quantitative figure where I can say, hey, moving, to a cloud-based enterprise system for X, Y, or Z is going to save me $2 million. We know it's going to save huge amounts of time and efficiency, but trying to quantify that is a huge challenge for the industry, for people that are trying to get staff to do this work. And it's, I wish I had a silver bullet and a solution to say, hey, here's how you do it. But I think it's really, to start that effort, you have to understand what's involved. You have to be able to connect the dots on where the efficiencies can be gained and, quite frankly, what problems that you are currently having that it can solve. because I think that's, at least in my experience, that's the best way to approach that problem. It's not purely with those quantitative factors, it's the qualitative factors of, here, this organization is having all kinds of problems with, change orders, for example, or whatever the case may be, and here's how we can help solve that. And I think that's how we begin to address that issue. That's how we begin to get staff that can really help us implement and then thrive with systems of the type we're talking about.
So I'm going to bring us kind of to the last little topic here. And I think in our previous, earlier in this conversation, we talked about the data availability from construction rolling into the operations and maintenance phase. So I want to kind of move us backwards a little bit as an example, and actually open this up to the, so we're talking about data availability to bridge between the different phases of an asset lifecycle. So good construction data to help with operations and maintenance. But we have also started to see a much greater need for good data from the planning and design. So better constructible designs to accelerate the construction phase. And I would imagine there's also the same idea. Good, reliable data from the operations and maintenance to make the planning and design phase much easier and much more successful and much more impactful. So that narrative is coming around to a question: is that have you found those type of things? And in particular, I'd love to dig into the better designs to accelerate the construction phase. Have you found any results in that, in terms of maybe it's bringing the contractors in to that planning and design phase to be able to influence the design early to help accelerate construction?
Yeah, I can kick off this one. So at O'Hare in particular, we are starting to adopt more of the construction manager at risk construction contractor model, which essentially allows us to bring a construction manager into a project during its design phase to start helping with not only complete the design detail, but also start breaking it into its construction, phase chunks, and start to break apart a complex project into its kind of components, and start, bringing the actual construction contractors that are going to do the work to the table in sort of a meaningful way. There is value in doing that because, architects and engineers, think in models and think in, proposed conditions on top of existing conditions. But having a construction-minded contractor on board during that design phase really helps, ask the right questions and start planning the physical work that needs to take place, right? Not that architects and engineers don't think about that, but because a construction manager at risk contractor is going to be held to that, specific level of work, they're, by definition going to be thinking about constructability, right? How do I bring in the right construction equipment in this limited area which has operations occurring around it? How do I plan that out? What does a month of work look like in this particular area? Certainly that's a challenge at an airport like O'Hare, where, pretty much all of our projects are being constructed in a brownfield, not a greenfield, right? We don't have the advantage of putting a brand new facility in an open field that doesn't have any infrastructure already there or operations taking place. Everything we do at the airport needs to consider operations taking place around it. So that makes constructability a major challenge. So having that construction manager step in relatively early in the process helps have those conversations and kind of guide that, right? So we don't just think about, what does the 3D model look like if you plop it down, in this particular geographic space? How do we now separate the components into, what does a crane need to do as it comes in? What routes does it need to take? Where can it actually operate with its radius? What other construction equipment will need to be brought in and in what ways? So it does really help inform kind of the nature of the design and perhaps more importantly, the schedule and cost of the project.
Stumping everybody else?
I mean, one of the things I've always enjoyed about, BIM is really kind of the clash detection meetings where all the disciplines come together. They bring all of their information in and they're able to see, conflicts, work through those conflicts and address them. But it kind of speaks to what Joe was commenting on. And, we need to move away from folks working in kind of isolation and hoping it all comes together in the end, or kind of muddling our way through it in the field. It certainly represents a huge cost and, either to fee or to schedule, but it also represents safety issues as well. Trying to, deconstruct or work through issues in the moment versus addressing those in a digital format. So really bringing the right people to the table at the right phases of the work is critically important to help validate it. We like to say erasers are cheaper than jackhammers. So if we can correct those major issues early in the process and consistently through the right level of engagement, the more successful the project will be, the more we can reduce the risk, the likelihood of significant change orders to fee and schedule. But equally, safety is critically important. And I know we all want safety on our jobs, so we want to make sure, as Joe noted, if we need to bring in heavy equipment or materials, can the ground support it? Do we have the right, access for that equipment or material? Is it going to conflict with other operations? Because, oh, geez, if only we would have, asked this person, they would have been able to highlight right away that this was going to be a conflict. So taking the right time to really identify those players, including them at the right time, allowing for their review and input is extremely beneficial at those given stages of, planning, preliminary design, construction, and then O&M, so that all of the necessary players are able to contribute to that larger success and implementation.
Yeah, I'll say the challenge I always give to any of the contractors, the BIM leads, that we work with is, the intent of the contractors, one, yes, develop the fabrication shop models to, facilitate the manufacturing process, but it's also to model the things that aren't on the drawings, and I think that speaks to what Joe's talking about is, what are those clearance zones? What are the safety zones? What is the, how do you articulate your means and methods, or how do you use the model to help articulate means and methods? And perhaps ask questions that you can't, easily ask looking at the PDFs, but it's modeling what's not there or what's not going to be there at the end. It's what is that, modeling those temporary conditions and, using that model to kind of, mold it to this, again, these temporary conditions. That's also very important. But then, then how do you distill that back out and make that, necessarily not a part of that final asset deliverable?
I think we've touched on a lot of things here with your last question, Matt, and I think to me it all boils down to one thing, right? With efficient access to lots of different types of information, it allows staff and stakeholders to really focus on some of the things that they perhaps wouldn't have had time for or didn't do as effectively as they could in the past, right? So is that from a safety perspective or whatever perspective you might be looking at, constructability? What I'm finding is that because we are starting to do a much better job of making information available to these folks, they are able to focus more on those things, right? We have fewer constructability issues because people have had time to sit down and talk about them, right? And I think that's huge from our perspective, and it's another one of those, qualitative sorts of bonuses you get out of data accessibility that we didn't have as good in the past.
Rick, that's amazing. That you just did my job for me in trying to sum up the last 3 episodes into one concise point. So I think you might have a future in podcasting. So that was brilliant. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of you. This has been just a great 3-part series exploring this idea. We could probably go on for another 30 minutes if we had the time. So, but Joe McHugh from Chicago Department of Aviation, Rick Niederstadt from Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District, Aaron Ford from HNTB, and Zachary Lewis from Connect Chicago Alliance. Thank you guys so much for taking the time, the extended time to do a 3-part series. It has been an absolute blast. To everybody listening, watching that's gotten to experience this, if this was your first episode, there's 2 other pieces to this. Go back and check out the past 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for checking this out. And as always, until next time, stay connected.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Connected Construction Show. For more information, visit us at connectedconstructionshow.com.